The billionaire sat perfectly still in his leather chair, eyes closed as if asleep. But in reality, he was wide awake, testing the honesty of a child who didn't know she was being watched. The air in the room was heavy with silence, the kind that makes even the sound of a ticking clock feel like thunder. Just a few feet away, the young girl bent down to pick up the envelope he had accidentally dropped, its edges worn, its weight undeniable. Inside was more money than her family had seen in months. Her hands trembled as she held it, torn between instinct and temptation. Why would a man with more wealth than he could ever spend place such a test in front of a child? What kind of heart seeks answers in shadows, pretending to sleep to watch another's choices unfold? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Ethan Cole was the kind of man whose name alone carried weight in boardrooms and headlines. A billionaire by his early 40s, he had everything most people could only dream of: power, influence, wealth beyond measure. Yet beneath the polished surface lay scars no money could heal. He had been betrayed by partners he once called brothers, deceived by women he thought he loved, and used by those who swore loyalty only to vanish when his fortunes shifted. For Ethan, life had become a game of survival, and survival meant never trusting anyone. He often said to himself that people could pretend all they wanted, but given the right opportunity, everyone had a price. To him, trust was a myth, and so, even surrounded by treasures inside his sprawling mansion, Ethan lived in a cage of suspicion, testing the world instead of letting it close enough to touch him. Far removed from Ethan's world of excess stood Rosa, a quiet woman whose life had been nothing but sacrifice. She worked in Ethan's mansion not out of choice, but out of necessity. As a single mother, she bore the weight of responsibility for a little girl who was the center of her universe. Rosa's hands were calloused from years of scrubbing floors and polishing glass walls that reflected wealth she could never imagine touching. Yet she carried herself with a humility that spoke louder than words, never complaining, never asking for more than what she was given. To Ethan, she was reliable, predictable even. He respected her discipline but never let himself forget that trust, in his eyes, was always borrowed time. Rosa, however, was not working for herself. Every step she took into that mansion, every hour she labored in silence, was for her daughter, Amara. Amara was only 10 years old, yet she carried a light that seemed untouched by the shadows of hardship. Her innocence showed in the way she marveled at simple things: a butterfly that fluttered too close to the window, the way the chandeliers sparkled as if the stars had been captured indoors. She was curious, playful, and unspoiled by the weight of the world her mother carried on her shoulders. For Rosa, Amara's laughter was hope. For Ethan, she was something different, an opportunity. To him, the purity of a child was the final test. If even a child raised in poverty and struggle could not resist temptation when faced with sudden wealth, then his belief would be confirmed, that no one, no matter how innocent, was beyond being bought. The mansion itself stood as a paradox, a fortress of luxury and a prison of loneliness. Its marble floors echoed with footsteps but not with laughter. Its golden halls shone brightly but offered no warmth. Ethan's home was filled with priceless art, yet it lacked the simplest of things: trust, companionship, love. It was in this setting that the stage was prepared, where a wealthy man with everything to lose decided to gamble it all in a quiet experiment. His stakes were not just the money he placed inside that envelope, but his conviction about humanity itself. Ethan believed that sooner or later, even the purest heart would reveal its price. And so, the test began, not just of Rosa's daughter, but of his own beliefs about people, loyalty, and the meaning of truth. That afternoon, Ethan announced casually to Rosa that he felt unusually tired and needed to rest in his study. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but beneath it ran a quiet calculation. Rosa, as always, nodded respectfully and began to gather her cleaning supplies. To her, it was nothing more than another ordinary day, To Ethan, it was the moment he had been preparing for. What Rosa didn't know was that her employer was staging an experiment, not with her, but with the one person she cherished most, her daughter. Ethan's heart was steady as he leaned back into his leather chair, his eyes closing slowly. To anyone watching, he appeared fast asleep, but behind the stillness, his mind was sharp, awake, and waiting. The game had begun. Near his chair, deliberately placed, stood the family safe. It was no ordinary vault. It gleamed in polished steel, a symbol of his wealth and power. Ethan had left its heavy door slightly ajar, just enough to reveal the glint of stacked bills and the shimmer of jewels inside. The light from the chandelier caught the edges of diamond bracelets and gold coins, casting tiny sparks across the room. It was bait, pure and simple, designed to test the limits of temptation. The question for Ethan was not whether an adult would resist, for he already doubted they could. His curiosity lay in whether a child, untouched by greed, could resist reaching for something that had never belonged to her. Rosa, trusting the silence of the room and the stillness of her employer, quietly excused herself for only a moment. She needed to fetch a basket of fresh linens from the hall, leaving Amara behind. "Stay here, sweetheart. Don't touch anything," she whispered softly, her footsteps fading as she disappeared through the door. Amara, small and wide-eyed, looked around the enormous study. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, but so did her own natural curiosity. The vastness of the room, the richness of the furniture, the quiet hum of the air conditioning, everything seemed to press down on her, urging her to explore. She fidgeted with her fingers, her young eyes scanning the room for anything that might capture her imagination. It didn't take long before something did. From across the room, she noticed the faint golden glow slipping through the crack of the safe door. The light reflected against polished marble, almost beckoning her closer. Amara tilted her head, her heart beginning to race in a way she couldn't explain. She glanced toward Ethan, whose chest rose and fell with the rhythm of sleep, or so she thought. He remained motionless, though every sense in his body was tuned to her every move. She inched closer, her small footsteps muffled against the rug. Her pulse quickened, her breath shallow. She could feel something, an invisible pull, drawing her toward the forbidden glow. Would this child resist the treasure lying within arm's reach, or would she unknowingly prove Ethan's harshest belief about humanity? And then, in that quiet study filled with secrets, the moment arrived. Amara stood before the open safe, the air around her thick with tension. Her small hand lifted slightly, trembling not from greed, but from wonder. Her heart pounded in her chest, louder and louder with every passing second. Behind her, the man pretending to sleep remained still, silently waiting to witness the truth of her choice. The room was swallowed by silence, broken only by the faint hum of the air vent and the steady ticking of the grandfather clock against the wall. Every second seemed stretched, suspended in time, as Amara's gaze locked onto the treasure inside the slightly open safe. The soft glow spilling from within cast shimmering shapes across the carpet, almost like golden ripples pulling her closer. Her small chest rose and fell quickly, her breaths shallow, her heart beating so loudly it seemed to echo in her own ears. For Ethan, seated only feet away, the silence was intoxicating. Beneath his closed eyelids, he felt his pulse slow, his body rigid with anticipation. He forced himself to breathe deeply, rhythmically, each rise and fall of his chest, convincing the little girl he was fast asleep. And still, he waited, straining to hear the faintest rustle that might betray her choice. Amara's tiny fingers curled nervously, her steps hesitant as she moved closer to the safe. She could smell the faint scent of her mother's lavender cleaning spray lingering in the air, could hear the wooden floor creak gently under her weight. The money inside glistened beneath the dim light, its edges crisp and neat, stacked so perfectly it seemed almost unreal. She reached out slowly, her hand trembling as it hovered inches above the cash. In that moment, her whole world felt like it balanced on a single choice. Behind her, Ethan adjusted the slightest movement of his breath, careful not to break the illusion. His heart, however, thundered inside him, louder than he had expected. He wanted to know the truth, but he also feared it. Would this little girl prove him right, confirming that even innocence could be bought, or would she prove him wrong in a way he couldn't imagine? The glow of the safe reflected in Amara's wide eyes as her fingertips brushed the air above the money. She wasn't thinking about riches or jewels. She didn't even fully understand the value of what she was seeing. What she felt was curiosity, a pull toward something forbidden, something she had been told her entire life was never hers to touch. Her breath hitched as she leaned closer, her lips parting slightly as if caught in a trance. The silence of the room grew heavier, almost deafening, each second dragging her deeper into temptation. Ethan, his body still and unmoving, listened for the sound of paper shifting, the gentle tug of currency being lifted. His entire body was tense, his mind racing with a single thought. This was the moment he would finally know if trust was nothing more than an illusion. But then, Amara froze. Her hand, hovering above the stack of bills, began to curl away. She stepped back just slightly, her lips pressing together in quiet thought. Ethan's heart sank for an instant, confused by her hesitation. She didn't reach for the money, nor the glittering jewels that winked at her from the shadows of the safe. Instead, she did something completely unexpected, something Ethan had never seen coming. Amara stood there, her little hand trembling as it hovered above the money, her reflection shimmering faintly on the polished steel door of the safe. Then, slowly, she drew her fingers back, curling them into her palm, as though sealing away the temptation. With a small breath, she reached for the heavy safe door and pushed it shut. The click of metal against metal echoed softly in the stillness, a sound so simple yet so powerful that it cut through the silence like a bell. Ethan, sitting motionless in his chair, felt a ripple move through him, confusion, surprise, even disbelief. He had prepared himself for disappointment, braced himself to confirm his darkest belief about human nature. But in this fragile, quiet act of refusal, the little girl shattered the expectation he had carried for years. She hadn't taken anything. She had walked away from the one thing adults in his life had always reached for. As the door shut fully, Amara leaned closer and whispered softly into the air, as though speaking to herself, but perhaps also to the memory of her mother's voice. "Mama says stealing breaks your soul." The words were innocent, yet they landed in the room with the weight of a sermon. Ethan's chest tightened as though the air itself had grown heavy. His eyes remained closed, his breaths carefully measured, but his mind was anything but calm. He had spent years guarding himself with the belief that loyalty was only a performance, a mask people wore until the chance for gain came their way. And yet here, before him, was a child too young to even fully grasp the riches she was rejecting, turning away not because she feared punishment, but because her mother's words carried more value than money could ever buy. Then, as if her choice needed something more, Amara reached into her small pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She opened it carefully, smoothing it with her tiny hands. On the page was a simple drawing: a house, a sun, a woman holding hands with a child. It was her family, drawn with bright crayons, the kind of art only a child could create, full of love and simplicity. Without hesitation, she placed the drawing gently on top of the safe, leaving it there as though it were a gift. It was her way of saying, "I have nothing else to offer, but I want to give something instead of taking." Ethan's throat tightened as he listened, his heart struck by the innocence in the gesture. In that moment, wealth and jewels paled in comparison to a child's simple act of giving. For the first time in years, Ethan Cole felt the foundation of his beliefs begin to tremble. He had expected betrayal, deceit, the confirmation that his suspicions about the world were justified. Instead, he found a child choosing honesty over temptation, love over greed. It shook him deeply, not because of the money left untouched, but because of the purity behind her action. He wanted to open his eyes, to say something, but he couldn't. He wasn't ready to reveal that he had been watching all along, so he stayed still, silent, absorbing the weight of what had just unfolded. What he didn't know yet was that this was only the beginning. Because Ethan's test wasn't over, what happened next would turn this small act of innocence into a life-changing moment neither he nor the little girl could ever forget. Later that evening, Ethan called Rosa into his study. His tone was calm, his face unreadable, the way it always was when he spoke to her. He asked about her day, about the chores, about whether Amara had behaved while she stepped out. Rosa answered humbly, assuring him that her daughter never caused trouble. Ethan nodded slowly, pretending to have seen nothing unusual, hiding the storm that brewed inside him. Outwardly, he remained the same guarded billionaire who trusted no one. But inside, he wrestled with a question he couldn't shake. Why did a 10-year-old child have stronger morals than the adults who had betrayed him? The memory of her words, "Mama says stealing breaks your soul," repeated in his head like a haunting echo. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar creeping into his chest. Not suspicion, not anger, something heavier, something closer to guilt. In the days that followed, Ethan found himself watching Amara more closely, though never in a way she could notice. He told himself it was curiosity, but in truth, it was something deeper. He began observing her small habits, the way she moved through the mansion with innocence that wealth could never corrupt. What he discovered unsettled him even more than the safe incident. He noticed how during meals, Amara often pushed parts of her food quietly toward her mother's plate. At first he thought it was a childish gesture, until one afternoon he realized the truth. Amara had been skipping her own meals in secret so her mother could eat more. The girl who had turned down riches she could not understand was now silently sacrificing what little she had just to keep her mother stronger. To Ethan, who had measured worth only in wealth, the revelation struck like a blade to the heart. Alone in his grand dining room, Ethan stared at the empty chair where Amara sometimes sat, the echoes of her laughter faint in his mind. His fortune had bought him everything except the one thing he desired most: love that could not be bought, loyalty that wasn't for sale, and family that didn't walk away when times grew hard. Watching this child, he realized she possessed all three in their purest form, and she gave them freely without expecting anything in return. For the first time, Ethan felt powerless, not because of betrayal, but because of honesty. And as he sat alone, wrestling with the weight of that truth, a single thought refused to leave him. Could this child, this daughter of a maid, teach him what all his money had never been able to buy? Ethan realized his money had never bought him love, loyalty, or family. But could this child show him what it truly meant? Ethan began inviting Amara to spend more time inside the mansion, no longer just as the maid's daughter lingering in the background, but as a welcome presence in his once silent halls. He found himself asking her small questions, showing her the grand library, letting her wander the garden that until then had been locked behind iron gates. The mansion, once a monument to loneliness, seemed to soften with the sound of her laughter. Yet Rosa, ever cautious, felt uneasy. She feared her daughter was being drawn into a world too distant from their own, a place built on wealth and privilege that could never be theirs. In quiet moments, Rosa would hold Amara's hand tightly and remind her, "Don't forget where we come from." Ethan noticed Rosa's unease, but did not confront her. In his mind, Amara wasn't being corrupted. She was teaching him how to see life through a lens he had long abandoned. Not everyone shared his growing warmth. When word spread among Ethan's wealthy acquaintances that he was spending time with the maid's daughter, ridicule followed. At private dinners, his so-called friends mocked him, whispering behind crystal glasses of wine. "The mighty Ethan Cole reduced to keeping company with a servant's child," one laughed, shaking his head in disbelief. They couldn't comprehend why a man with every luxury would choose to share his time with someone so ordinary. To them, it was weakness, proof that wealth had finally dulled his sharpness. But to Ethan, their laughter revealed something else, the very emptiness he had once lived by. Their words stung, yet he didn't turn Amara away. Instead, he found himself silently questioning the world he had built around himself and whether those he once trusted were worth keeping at all. But the past has a way of resurfacing. One evening, Ethan received a message from a former business partner, a man who had betrayed him years before. Cloaked in polite words and false warmth, the message promised reconciliation, a fresh deal too tempting to refuse. Yet hidden beneath the surface was exploitation. This partner, having heard rumors of Ethan's softened heart, saw an opportunity to strike again, to profit from a man they believed was losing his edge. Ethan felt the tension claw at him. Was his newfound openness a sign of strength, or a crack that others could exploit? As he sat with the letter in hand, the echoes of betrayal from his past returned, colliding with the sound of Amara's laughter upstairs. Ethan found himself caught between two worlds, the cold certainty of wealth and suspicion he had always known, and the fragile warmth of trust that Amara had awakened. The mansion no longer felt secure, not because of locked doors or open safes, but because of the conflict raging inside him. Was he truly changing, learning from a child's unshakable innocence? Or was this only another illusion, one that would soon shatter and leave him more broken than before? Ethan, still torn between the walls of suspicion that had defined his life and the fragile hope Amara had awakened, decided there would be one final test. Unlike the safe, this test was not planned with precision or wealth as the bait. Instead, it happened almost by instinct, as if part of him needed to know, once and for all, whether the innocence he saw in her was real. He left a private letter on his desk, an unsealed envelope containing words that revealed everything, details of his will, the staggering fortune he intended to leave behind, and the names of those who would inherit it. For Ethan, this was the kind of document people had killed for, betrayed families for, and ruined lives over. And this time, unlike before, he hadn't calculated the risk. He hadn't realized that by leaving it there, he was placing his most guarded secret in the hands of a child. Hours later, Amara wandered into the study while her mother worked in another room. She saw the envelope lying on the polished desk, its edges marked with his initials. Curiosity flickered in her eyes. Children notice what adults try to ignore. She walked closer, her small fingers brushing the edge of the paper. She could have opened it. She could have read names and numbers that would mean little to her now, but everything to the world Ethan lived in. The silence of the room pressed down on her, the faint scent of leather and old books surrounding her as she stood frozen before the letter. It wasn't temptation of gold this time. It was something deeper. It was knowledge, power, the kind of secret that could change lives. Behind the wall, Ethan watched quietly, his breath caught in his chest. This was no longer just a test. It was a confession of his deepest vulnerability. Amara picked up the letter, her hands trembling slightly as she held it to her chest. Her eyes lingered on the bold handwriting of his name, then drifted toward the chair where he often sat. For a moment, she closed her eyes, remembering her mother's gentle warnings about honesty, about carrying a soul that stayed clean no matter what the world offered. After what felt like a lifetime, she turned, walked to Ethan, and placed the envelope gently into his hand. Looking up at him with wide, earnest eyes, she whispered words that pierced the silence. "Secrets aren't mine to keep." Her voice was soft, almost fragile, but the weight it carried shattered the barriers Ethan had built around his heart. In that instant, Ethan broke. The walls of suspicion, the years of betrayal, the armor of wealth, all of it crumbled beneath the simple truth spoken by a child. Tears welled in his eyes as he clutched the letter, overwhelmed by emotions he had long buried. This girl, the daughter of his maid, had given him something his billions had never been able to buy. Trust that was pure, uncalculated, and freely given. For the first time in decades, Ethan Cole no longer felt like the richest man in the room. He felt like a man who had finally found something worth more than all the gold, jewels, and power he possessed. Ethan's world no longer looked the same after that moment. The mansion, once echoing with emptiness, now felt warmer with each step Amara took through its halls. He called Rosa into his study one evening, no longer as her employer, but as a man who finally understood the value of loyalty he had overlooked for so long. With quiet sincerity, he told her that her years of devotion had not gone unnoticed. But more than that, he wished to give back to the daughter who had taught him what no amount of wealth ever could. Ethan promised to fund Amara's education fully, ensuring her future would be bright and unburdened by the hardships her mother had endured. Yet his gift was more than money. It was the decision to treat them as the family he had always longed for, filling the void left behind by years of distrust and betrayal. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan found himself transformed. Where once he measured life by deals and dollar signs, he now measured it by trust, laughter, and the presence of two people who had entered his life quietly, yet changed it forever. Rosa's worry began to soften as she saw not a man drawing her child into a dangerous world, but one offering care, protection, and genuine respect. For Amara, the mansion no longer felt like a place of distance. It was a place where her simple acts of honesty had built something stronger than walls of stone. Ethan often reflected on it in the stillness of night, his thoughts circling back to one undeniable truth. Sometimes, the greatest treasure isn't found in safes or banks. It's found in the honesty of a child's heart. And now, we turn the question to you, the viewer. What would you have done if you were Amara? Would you have taken the money, or walked away with your soul untouched? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. If this story moved you, hit the like button. It helps us share more inspiring stories every week. And don't forget to subscribe for more gripping tales that will keep you reflecting long after the video ends.